you are sitting in a Bible study or talking to friends and you're saying, oh, well, this actually, in the ancient era, this might have sounded like the Enuma Elish, or this would have been things that people would have talked about, the theogonies, right, the creation of the gods, and then the cosmogony there as well. Um, I would imagine you, like in my mind, if I have that conversation with my friends who are not theologically oriented, their eyes just go blank like Dora the Explorer, and like they're not interested. So I'm wondering, how did you overcome that gap of interest?
One way I tell it that seems to work is I say, imagine a campfire of different backgrounds, and I think they're semi-pastoral nomads, so I think it's fair to picture this happening, even if we don't have record of it. But imagine, the Hittite sitting there, and then you've got the Egyptian there, and you've got Joe Hebrew here, and you've got this whole campfire of these guys sitting around and they're looking up at the stars, and somebody says, tell me your story. Tell me how it happened. What do you think it was? And, you'd hear one guy's story, and then you hear another guy's story, and then you hear the Hebrew story and the Jewish story. And as he would tell it, I say, sometimes I think that the campfire would get very upset. And sometimes I think the campfire would be like, oh, okay. And they would say, this is falling into the rhythm of what we understand. They would sit back relaxed. And sometimes they might get up and leave. And sometimes it's offensive. Sometimes it's beautiful and beyond compare. And so when the campfire gets animated, that's when we want to lean in and be like, And that has developed interest. People are like, oh, that sounds interesting. I can understand that.
Yeah. Could we also throw the American fundamentalist evangelical, which I am loosely related with that tradition? Could we put them around the campfire, and would they be offended, or would they see similarities?
Well, first off, I tell them they're not at the campfire. I say you're eavesdropping.
You're not invited. Yeah.
I,
Okay.
yeah, I just I call it holy eavesdropping. I say, we're listening in on a conversation that was happening, and so yeah, that's part of what you have to overcome. And secondly, our questions aren't the same questions they have. So I say, it can be a little bit rude to assert your primary interest into the conversation when that's not what they're asking. And I didn't let my 5-year-old do that. So I don't think that's fair for us to do that either. But I do think there's some things that are hard. I think God's delivering some truths that are a little bit difficult to hear, in a good way, right? In a good way. But I think overall his message is one that we probably miss out on. Like, I think you hear a lot about the power and majesty of creation, and a lot of times we skip the goodness, like, why is goodness repeated? Not just because it's good, because he's good, right? And so, like, there's a lot in there that is good digging into.
And where do you find, as you're explaining these things, because it reads very much like you have talked through these things with other people. As you're explaining, where do you find the biggest stumbling blocks where people, because I could imagine people also saying, like, why are you talking about quote unquote pagan, text and pagan stories? Like, we're talking about what God said, not those people said. Like, you're eavesdropping too far.
Yeah. Like, when I'm citing coffin text spells, right? Like,
Right.
sometimes the people who look at the endnotes sometimes are like, hey, that seems wicked. So I'm like, yeah, fair enough. Fair question. The thing that people mostly struggle with, I think, is the concept of just the idea of reading other stories. I think it's the vocab. When I say, we're going to put Genesis next to these other, I say stories, not myths, because that's a word that just creates all sorts of
Right.
issues. But then even the word story mixes them up, and we run into the other litmus test, which is inerrancy. And I try to avoid that by saying, we tell the story of Jacob, right? We believe that happened, but the word story I'm using in that way, and that helps. But that's probably, you're right. Like, when comparing it to other texts, they're saying, but ours is true. I say, yeah, it is true. And what is it communicating? It's using this style. It's like the style of a Western, right? Like, they're using that style to tell you something very specific. Let's lean into the style. So.
Hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters. Great. Okay, so the book is called Rest Assured. Very clever. So what do you why are you looking at creation through the lens of rest? I think that would catch a lot of people off guard because they don't think of rest as like the thing that's going on in creation. And what kind of work? Well, I'll let you say why the lens of rest, and we can talk about what work that metaphor does for you.
Yeah, so God rested on the seventh day. And so that was one of the big things that really changed for me when I learned that, rest is like saying sitting down kind of at a throne because everything is operating correctly. God can sit on his throne. And that's like a good way to end a cosmogony, is to say, yeah, and the deity rests. And it's rest not as in napping, but as in reigning, or like Star Trek, like engaged. We're ready to go, ready to roll. It's like the beginning of something awesome is happening because everything is set up. And so that shift in thinking really, really changed a lot of things for me, because if God is reigning, and that's what that means in the end, and it's saying that God has set up the homeostasis and here we go, we're going to run. What does it mean when he asks me to rest? And what does it mean that God is on the throne? First off, in like Genesis, when he gets to the end and he sits down, there's a couple of really interesting conclusions there. One, there was no battle. So what's that about? But then secondly, like what he set up to run perfectly, like to look at that and to say that was the ideal, that was important. And then also to say who is on the throne. So, we all say worship God, God's on the throne, that's great. But I feel like Genesis 1 is saying, but who is God? Like that's what we should be concerned with. Like, and that's what's really, really, really beautiful. And so then once we kind of meditate on who God is on the throne, then our ability to rest is easier, honestly. I'm happier that he is on the throne. That guy who did all that stuff, thank God that is who is on the throne. And if we can put all that together and then understand that our call to rest is to actually say, you are God and I am not, in all the jillion areas that we're worried about, then that just changes a lot of things.
Yeah, it's a hard equation, especially for Americans who are very individualist and then functionally oriented towards we take care of everything.
Yeah, I got this.
I have all kinds of insurances so that I don't have to trust God for just about anything, right?
Yeah.
Just have to trust the insurance company. That's not a swipe at insurance.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of our existence.
Yeah.
Would you also see this as a parallel in we think of the ascension of Jesus as him kind of taking his role as regent with God, but he does sit at a throne, right? He ascends to a throne. So is that the same thing going on with Jesus? You can walk away from this one as well.
I mean, it seems like it. I think it seems like there's that second kingdom, idea that the reign has also been inaugurated for this kingdom come, for the restoration plan is beginning this big arc, and that's a huge piece of it. So yeah, I think it's on purpose. I think it's a shadow and a mirror and all of those things.
And I know my Jewish listeners will be leaning in right now because it sounds like what you're suggesting is rest means a lot of work in preparation so that you can sit and things will run, right? Which tends to be around the Jewish holidays. This is happening, especially Pesach. But even every week, you have to coordinate your week so that you can sit and let things run, right? Okay. When you talk about Sabbath in the church, do you we have this discussion, I was a pastor getting people say, hey, like it's good to take a Sabbath. Like it's, there's atheists or books written by atheists that are suggesting people should take a Sabbath. But I've come to also realize that it's disingenuous to tell people to take a Sabbath if they're not working 6 days a week. So, which also offend, both sides offend Americans,
Yeah.
right? That you should tell them like, hey, you need to stop working one day a
Yeah.
week and do something else, and also like you need to work 6 days a week, not a weekend.
Ah,
So, do you see both sides operating here in the creation narrative?
I do think there's like a 6-1 rhythm for sure. I think the idea of 7 is interesting in that it might not have been like if I think about sitting around that campfire, right, and they're listening in, and he says we get to the end and it's day 1. Like I feel like the campfire would lean in and be like, how many days are we going? Right?
Mm,
Because 7 was really special. 7 meant something really interesting was happening. It was kind of a combination of sacred and lovely. Like 7 meant something. And so when they get to day 2 and then 3 and then 4, like I feel like the campfire would be like, how many are we going to?
right.
Like that's really fun. And so I think the 7 is interesting in that way. And then when God does, starts with the Exodus and the manna from heaven, it's definitely the 6-1 rhythm, right? So you get the
Right.
6 and this 1 and then 6 and then 1. And then the prophets, later on when they talk to him, they're kind of upset at what's happening at the 6 and they're upset with what's happening with the 1. Like they're supposed to be a cohesive unit, not just separated. And so I do think it's interesting that in creation it is one event and it is recognizing the rain on one day, but then operating within the functions that God has given you in the 6. But if you're doing the 6 wrong, then the 1 isn't going to work out either.
Right.
Like you can't toggle it
Right.
and pick and choose, which is all of the prophets that they're pounding about. And then you get to the Pharisees and to the other books later where they're adding the rules and the guardrails, and they're like, look, we have to do the 6 right and we have to do the 1 right. Like they're just really really concerned about that because they're concerned about holiness and they
Right.
care. And it's really I think it was a fair concern to have because they'd really messed it up. And Jesus is like, well, turns out not quite. Let's reframe it just a touch.
Right.